All my life, I have been the woman everyone loved to blame, and I let them, because the truth would have shattered the people I loved most. I am writing this now with hands that tremble not from age, but from memory. At 83, the nights are long and sleep no longer comes easily. When it doesn't, the past creeps in, slow and heavy, like a shadow stretching across the walls of this quiet house. I hear voices that no longer exist. I see faces that once turned away from me in disgust, disappointment, and quiet hatred. And I wonder, for the thousandth time, if I chose right. I grew up in a family that believed appearances mattered more than truth. We were the kind of family that smiled in public and bled in private. My mother used to say, "What people think of us will follow you longer than your own shadow." I believed her. I believed her so deeply that I carried that belief into adulthood, into marriage, into motherhood, and eventually into my silence. I was the eldest daughter. That meant responsibility before childhood, obedience before curiosity, and sacrifice before desire. My younger siblings adored me when we were small. They followed me everywhere, trusted me with secrets, cried into my lap when nightmares came. I was their shield, their second mother. And when the time came for someone to be hated, I became that too. I married young, as women did back then. My husband was charming in front of others, kind eyes, steady voice, a man people trusted instantly. My family adored him. My mother called him a blessing. My father shook his hand with pride. I smiled and said nothing, even on the nights when the walls heard my sobs and the bruises bloomed where clothing could hide them. I told myself this was marriage, that love meant endurance, that silence was strength. When our children were born, I thought things might change. I thought becoming a father would soften him. Instead, it sharpened something dark inside him. He was cruel in ways that left no marks, cruel in ways that twisted reality until I doubted my own memory. And still, I said nothing. Because speaking would have meant destroying the image my family clung to, the image of stability, of respectability, of a good man and a lucky wife. The breaking point didn't come with a scream or a slap. It came quietly on a rainy afternoon when I came home earlier than expected. The house smelled wrong, too still, too careful. I remember the sound my shoes made on the floor, the way my heart began to race before my mind understood why. And then I saw something I will carry with me into the grave. That was the day my life split into before and after. I could have screamed. I could have called my family, my parents, my siblings, and told them everything. I could have let the truth tear through the house like fire, but I didn't. Because the truth wasn't just about me anymore. It involved someone they loved deeply, someone innocent, someone fragile. And if the truth came out, it wouldn't just ruin one man. It would destroy a child's future, fracture my family beyond repair, and leave scars that would never heal. So I made a choice that still haunts me. I left. Not quietly, not gently. I left in a way that made me look guilty. I packed my things while he watched, a smile playing on his lips as if he already knew what I was about to do. He whispered, "They'll never believe you." And he was right. I didn't take the children with me. Not because I didn't love them, but because I knew the courts, the family, the world would side with him. I knew the truth would come out in pieces, twisted and doubted, and the one person I needed to protect would be caught in the middle. So I walked away, carrying the weight of every judgment I knew would follow. My family turned on me faster than I expected. My mother slapped me across the face when I told her I was leaving. She called me selfish. My father refused to look at me. My siblings stopped calling. Word spread quickly, whispers of betrayal, of abandonment, of a woman who chose herself over her family. I didn't correct them, I nodded. I let their anger settle into something permanent. Years passed. The children grew up believing I had abandoned them. They learned to live without me, to resent me, to build stories around my absence that hurt less than the truth. I watched from a distance, through photographs, through secondhand updates. Every birthday I marked alone, every holiday passed in silence. I wrote letters I never sent. And the person I was protecting? They grew up believing a lie too. one carefully constructed to keep them safe, even if it meant I became the villain. Now, as my body weakens and my time grows short, the question presses harder than ever. Was my silence an act of love or cowardice dressed up as sacrifice? There is more to this story, much more. Things my family never knew, things my children never suspected, things that, if spoken aloud, would finally explain why I let myself be hated for a lifetime. But the truth has a way of waiting, and it is not done with me yet. The years after I left were the quietest and loudest of my life at the same time. Quiet because no one called my name anymore. No one asked where I was going or when I'd be home. Loud because guilt has a voice and it never whispers. It spoke to me in grocery store aisles when I saw children clinging to their mother's skirts. It spoke to me in the middle of the night when I reached for someone who wasn't there. It spoke every time I passed a mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. I moved to a small town where no one knew me. I rented a room in a widow's house and took work that kept my hands busy so my mind wouldn't wander. Cleaning, sewing, caring for the elderly. Funny, isn't it? Even then, I spent my life caring for others while my own heart quietly starved. At first, I told myself I would stay away only for a little while, just until things cooled down, just until the children were older, just until the truth could be told without destroying everything. But time has a way of stretching excuses into forever. 1 year turned into 5, 5 turned into 10. And before I knew it, my absence had become a fact everyone accepted, even if they didn't understand it. My mother fell ill during those years. I found out through a distant cousin who still pitied me enough to send word. I stood outside the hospital once, just once, watching families come and go. I imagined walking in, imagined her eyes meeting mine, imagined the questions I couldn't answer. I never went inside. She died believing I was a disappointment. I carried that with me like a second spine. My children grew into strangers. I saw them once by accident in a crowded street. They were taller, their faces sharper, their laughter unfamiliar. They walked past me without a glance. I wanted to reach out, to say their names, to beg forgiveness for something I could never explain. My feet wouldn't move. Love, I learned, can paralyze as much as it can protect. And then there was the one I truly left for. The child. People think silence is empty, but silence can be carefully built, brick by brick, lie by lie. I had crafted a world where that child could grow without suspicion, without shame, without whispers trailing them into every room. I paid attention from afar. I made sure they were cared for, educated, supported, always anonymously, always invisibly. I became a ghost with a purpose. Sometimes I hated myself for it. Sometimes I convinced myself it was noble. Most days it was simply unbearable. My ex-husband remarried quickly. Of course he did. Men like him don't like empty houses. They like witnesses. His new wife fit perfectly into the role I once played. Sweet, devoted, blind. I watched her fall into place with a heaviness in my chest I couldn't name. I wanted to warn her, but I knew better. Warnings without proof sound like jealousy, like bitterness, like madness. And I had already been labeled unstable once. I wouldn't survive it again. Years later, rumors reached me. Quiet ones. Hints that something wasn't right inside that house. That the child I had protected was struggling, confused, angry. That questions were forming. Truth has a way of leaking through the cracks, no matter how carefully you seal them. Each rumor felt like a knife. I wondered if my silence was still helping or if it had begun to rot. There were nights I almost picked up the phone. Nights I practiced the words out loud, whispering them into the darkness. I didn't leave because I didn't love you. I left because staying would have destroyed you. But explanations don't land the same after decades of absence. They sound like excuses. They sound too late. When my ex-husband died suddenly, I felt something close to relief and immediately hated myself for it. Death doesn't erase harm. It doesn't grant justice. It just ends the possibility of confrontation. The truth died with him, or so everyone thought. That's when letters began to arrive. At first, they were polite, curious. Questions about the past, about why I left, about whether I ever thought of coming back. They were written in a careful hand, one I recognized instantly even though I had not seen it in years. The child was no longer a child. They were searching. I didn't respond right away. I stared at those envelopes for weeks, my heart pounding as if it wanted to escape my chest. I knew what answering would mean. Once the door opened, it would never fully close again. Secrets don't like daylight. They demand to be seen. But something had changed. I was tired. Not just in my bones, but in my soul. Carrying hatred is heavy work, and I had done it long enough. I began to wonder if protecting the truth had slowly turned into protecting my own fear. So I wrote back. Carefully. Gently. I told fragments, not the whole. I spoke of love. Of impossible choices, of mistakes that looked cruel from the outside but were made in terror. I didn't name names. I didn't spell out the horror. But I felt the shift immediately. Questions sharpened. The letters came faster, more urgent. The truth was pulling at its leash. Now, as I sit here with my body failing me and my time thinning like old fabric, I know the end of this story is near. The truth I buried to save a family is pressing upward, roots cracking the ground. I can feel it in every breath. Soon, I will have to decide whether to take the full truth with me into the grave, or finally speak the words that would explain why I let my family hate me for a lifetime. Because the final secret, the one I have never written, never spoken, never allowed myself to fully remember, is darker than anything they ever imagined. And once it's revealed, nothing will ever look the same again. The letter that finally broke me arrived on a winter morning so cold my windows wept with frost. My hands shook as I opened it, not from the chill, but from the way I already knew what it would say before I read a single word. There is a weight certain questions carry. You feel them before you see them. They settle in your chest and make breathing feel borrowed. They wrote that they remembered something now. Not clearly, just pieces, a room, a smell, a feeling of dread that didn't belong to a child. They wrote that they had spent years telling themselves it was imagination, that children invent monsters to make sense of the dark. But the memories were growing sharper, more insistent. And then came the sentence that made my vision blur. I think you left because of me. Did I do something wrong? I pressed my forehead to the table and cried the way I hadn't cried in decades, without sound, without dignity, with my whole body folding in on itself, like it wanted to disappear. That was the moment I realized my silence had reached its breaking point. I had meant to protect them, but now my absence had become another wound, maybe worse than the truth ever would have been. I wrote back immediately, my pen digging into the paper so hard I thought it might tear through. I told them no, over and over. No, you did nothing wrong. No, you were never the problem. No, I left because I loved you more than my own life. Even as I wrote it, I knew it wasn't enough. Love without explanation can feel hollow, like an apology without accountability. The memories I had spent a lifetime burying began to rise then, uninvited and vivid. I remembered the day I came home early. The rain, the stillness, the way my heart started pounding before my eyes caught up. I remembered the doorway, the sound of my own breath breaking. I remembered the look on his face when he realized I was there. Not fear, not shame, but annoyance, as if I had interrupted something trivial. I remembered the child freezing, eyes wide, confused, terrified, not yet old enough to understand what was happening, but old enough to know it was wrong. And I remembered the moment our eyes met. That was when I knew my life, as I understood it, was over. I didn't scream because screaming would have alerted the neighbors. I didn't attack him because that would have led to police, questions, investigations. And I knew, God help me, I knew that the world did not protect children the way it pretended to. Not then. Especially not when the accused was a respected man and the accuser was a quiet woman with no bruises to show. He told me later, calmly, that no one would believe me. He listed all the reasons like facts from a ledger, his job, his reputation, my emotional state, the lack of proof. And then he said the thing that sealed my fate. If I spoke, the child would be dragged through hell, questioned, dissected, blamed. Their name would forever be attached to a word no child should have to carry. That was when I chose to disappear. I thought leaving would remove the danger. I thought distance would starve the secret. What I didn't understand then was that trauma doesn't need proximity to survive. It only needs silence. As the letters continued, the questions grew more direct. They asked if he had ever hurt me, if there was something about him they should know, if their memories were real. Each question felt like walking closer to the edge of a cliff I had been skirting my whole life. I delayed again, not because I didn't want to answer, but because I was afraid of what would happen once the truth was fully spoken. Families don't just break, they explode. And I had already lived long enough with the shrapnel of one explosion lodged inside me. Then came the diagnosis. The doctor used gentle words, the kind meant to soften reality. Months, not years. Time suddenly became precious in a way it never had before. Secrets feel different when you realize you might die with them, still locked inside you. They start to feel like theft. I wrote one final letter, longer than all the others combined. I told them everything, not in rage, not in vengeance, but in the careful, trembling honesty of a mother who had failed and loved in equal measure. I described the day I left. I described why I couldn't take them with me. I described the choice between being believed and keeping them safe, and how I chose safety even if it meant being hated forever. I told them I would understand if they never forgave me. Weeks passed without a response. Each day felt heavier than the last. I imagined every possible reaction: anger, disbelief, silence. I prepared myself to die, as I had lived, misunderstood. And then the phone rang. Their voice was older, steadier, but beneath it I heard the child they once were. They didn't scream. They didn't accuse. They cried. They said the memories made sense now. They said they wished I had stayed. They said they were angry. They said they loved me. All of it tangled together, messy and real. We met once, just once, in a quiet room with sunlight spilling across the floor. We talked for hours about everything and nothing, about the past, about the cost of silence, about how protection can look like abandonment when you don't know the reason. When I left that room, I felt lighter than I had in 50 years. My family may never understand. Some truths arrive too late to mend every fracture, but the one person I sacrificed everything for finally knows why. And that, I believe, is what makes my ending bearable. After that meeting, something inside me shifted, like a long locked door finally opening. I had spent so many years braced for hatred that I didn't know what to do with understanding. It felt fragile, like glass in my hands. I was afraid that if I moved too quickly, if I hoped too hard, it would shatter. We didn't suddenly become a picture-perfect family. That's not how life works, and certainly not after decades of silence. There were awkward pauses, moments where words failed us, times when old wounds flared without warning. Sometimes they would ask a question, and I would feel myself shrink back into the woman I used to be, the one who survived by swallowing truths. Other times they would look at me with a sadness so deep it stole my breath, and I knew it was grief for a childhood that could never be returned. Still, we tried. They visited me a few times after that first meeting, sat in the same quiet house where I now write these words. They noticed things no one else ever had. The way I flinch at sudden sounds, the way I lock doors twice, the way I choose chairs facing exits. They didn't ask about those things. They didn't need to. Understanding lives in silence too, just a different kind. One afternoon, while the kettle boiled and rain tapped gently against the window, they asked me something I had feared more than any accusation. They asked, if you had to choose again, would you still leave? The question lodged itself in my chest like a stone. I wanted to say no. I wanted to say I would fight harder, scream louder, burn the whole world down if it meant staying. But honesty has a shape, and lies don't fit it very well. I told them the truth. I said I didn't know. I said that back then, with the laws the way they were, with the family we had, With the power imbalance so severe, leaving felt like the only way to protect them. I said that staying might have meant years of damage, hidden and normalized, until it broke them in ways no apology could fix. I also said that leaving broke them too, just differently. There are no clean choices when evil lives inside your home. They nodded. They didn't push. That was when I realized they were no longer searching for a villain. They were searching for peace. Not everyone was willing to hear my truth. Word spread, as it always does. Some of my siblings reached out after decades of silence. Their messages were cautious, almost formal, as if they were afraid of catching something from me. A few listened. A few cried. One told me I should have spoken sooner, that I had robbed them of the chance to protect me. I wanted to scream that I had been protecting their child, but I didn't. Pain doesn't need competition. Others refused outright. They said I was rewriting history to ease my conscience. They said I was cruel for stirring old wounds. They said I was selfish even now. I accepted it. I had learned long ago that not everyone deserves the truth, especially if they plan to use it as a weapon. As my health worsened, my world grew smaller. Days became measured by medication schedules and doctor visits. Nights stretched long and quiet, but something was different now. I no longer felt like I was waiting to be punished. I felt like I was closing a book I had been forced to read aloud my entire life. The child, no, the adult now, held my hand one evening when my pain was particularly bad. Their grip was firm, grounding. They said something I will carry with me until my last breath. They said, "You weren't weak. You were trapped, and you found a way out that saved me." I didn't know how badly I needed to hear that until the words settled into my bones. There was one more thing I had never told anyone, not even them, a detail so heavy I had convinced myself it didn't matter anymore. But as my body failed, my need for complete honesty grew stronger than my fear. I told them that the day I left, I hadn't just walked away with a suitcase. I had taken evidence. Not enough for a court, not enough to guarantee justice, but enough to ensure he never touched another child. I had given it quietly, strategically, to the right people. The investigation never went public, his reputation survived, but his access didn't. They cried when I told them that, not out of grief, out of relief. Knowing that my sacrifice hadn't been entirely in vain eased something inside me I hadn't even known was still aching. I hadn't been powerless. I had just been invisible. Now, as I sit here, the house dim and still, I think about legacy. Not the kind written in obituaries, but the kind etched into the lives we touch. For years, my legacy was absence. A mystery, a cautionary tale whispered at family gatherings. Now, at the very end, it has become something else entirely. Complicated, painful, but real. I don't know what will happen after I'm gone. I don't know who will remember me kindly and who will cling to their anger like armor. But I do know this. The truth, once spoken, has a way of loosening chains you didn't realize you were still wearing. And there is still one final choice left to make. One last act of love. The final choice I was speaking of began as a thought I tried to ignore. It crept in during the quietest hours, when the house felt hollow and the ticking clock sounded like a countdown. I had already told the truth to the one person who mattered most. I had loosened the knot around my own soul. But the rest of the family still lived with a lie that shaped how they remembered me and how they remembered themselves. I asked myself if it was fair to leave them that way. For decades, I had believed silence was protection. But silence can also be a prison, especially for the people left outside of it. My siblings had grown old too. They had built lives, raised children, buried parents, all while carrying the story of a sister who abandoned them. That story had hardened inside them. It had shaped their judgments, their bitterness, their sense of moral certainty. What would truth do to them now? I imagined my brother, rigid in his beliefs, finally realizing the monster he had defended. I imagined my sister, who had modeled her marriage after mine, questioning everything she had tolerated because she thought it was normal. I imagined the ripple effects, arguments, breakdowns, regrets so sharp it might never soften. I understood then that truth doesn't just reveal pain. Sometimes it creates it. The adult I had protected told me gently that I didn't owe anyone anything anymore. They said I had already paid in full. They said I deserved rest. I wanted to believe them. God knows I wanted to choose peace. But peace built on a lie is a fragile thing, and I had lived long enough pretending fragility was strength. So I began to write again. Not letters this time, but a record. A careful, chronological account of everything, what I saw, what I knew, what I did, and why. I included dates, details, names. I included my fears, my doubts, my mistakes. I did not soften myself, and I did not dramatize him. I let facts do the damage. It took weeks, and it exhausted me more than any illness ever had. Each page felt like lifting a stone from my chest and placing it gently on paper. When I finished, I sealed it in an envelope and labeled it simply, "For After." I didn't tell anyone about it at first. It sat in a drawer beside my bed, heavy with finality. Knowing it existed changed the way I breathed. It was a release valve, a promise that the truth would not die with me, even if I didn't live to see its consequences. My health declined faster after that. The body, I learned, waits for permission to let go. Once my mind was settled, my flesh followed. There were days I barely left the bed. Days when memories came uninvited, looping like old film reels. But they no longer felt like accusations. They felt like witnesses. On one of my clearer afternoons, my sibling visited, the one who had always been the harshest, the one who had never forgiven me, not even quietly. They stood awkwardly in the doorway, hands clasped, eyes uncertain. Age had softened their face, but not their posture. We talked about ordinary things at first. The weather, the drive, the price of groceries. Then they looked at me and asked, "Why now?" It was the hardest question of all. I told them that time had finally made the truth less dangerous than the lie. I told them that I didn't expect forgiveness, but I couldn't leave this world without at least offering understanding. They didn't respond right away. They just nodded, stiff and silent. When they left, I didn't know if I had reached them at all. Later that night, I cried. Not because of what I said, but because of everything I hadn't said for so long. Silence has a cost, and it charges interest. As the days blurred together, I felt my priorities narrowing. The house no longer mattered. The objects no longer mattered. Only people did. Only what they carried forward. I asked the adult I had protected to promise me something, that they would live loudly, unapologetically, without shrinking themselves to keep others comfortable. They smiled sadly and promised. I also asked them to be the one to deliver the envelope when the time came. That decision scared me more than death itself. Handing the truth to someone else meant losing control over how it would be received, interpreted, weaponized, or healed by. But control had been an illusion all along. I had simply been choosing which pain to endure. Now the choice was nearly complete. I could feel the end approaching. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but with a steady certainty that wrapped itself around me like a shawl. I was not afraid. I was tired in the way someone is tired after a long journey, not because they regret the miles, but because they have walked far enough. There is one last thing I want remembered about me, though. Not the scandal, not the silence, not even the sacrifice. I want it remembered that love is not always loud. Sometimes it looks like absence. Sometimes it looks like being misunderstood for a lifetime so someone else can sleep at night without fear. Soon the truth will belong to everyone. And then, finally, I will rest. I knew the end was close the morning I woke up without fear. For as long as I can remember, fear had been my first companion of the day. Fear of being found out, fear of being judged again, fear of dying with words still trapped inside me. That morning, there was none of it, just a strange calm, like the stillness before snowfall when the world holds its breath. The adult I had protected sat beside my bed, reading softly, their voice steady. Sometimes they stopped and looked at me as if they were memorizing my face, and I pretended not to notice. We both understood what this quiet meant. No one needed to say it. I asked them to open the drawer. Their hand hesitated when they saw the envelope. I could tell they wanted to argue, to tell me it wasn't necessary, that enough had already been said. I shook my head. There are things you don't leave unfinished, not if you want peace on the other side of living. I told them what to do when I was gone, who to give it to, who might rage, Who might weep? Who would deny it until the very end? I told them not to defend me too hard. People protect their own version of the past the way they protect their bones. Let them react how they need to. Then I said the hardest thing of all. I told them I was sorry. Not for leaving, not for protecting them, but for the loneliness my choice had carved into their life, for the birthdays without explanations, for the questions that followed them into adulthood. Love doesn't erase damage, even when it causes it. Owning that mattered. They cried then, openly, the way children cry when they finally feel safe enough to fall apart. They told me something I hadn't dared to hope for, that knowing the truth had given them permission to stop blaming themselves, to stop wondering what was wrong with them, that my absence no longer felt like rejection, but like a shield. That was when I understood the twist of it all. The truth I had hidden to keep them safe didn't break them when it was finally revealed. What nearly broke them was not knowing. I drifted in and out after that. Time loosened its grip. Memories arrived gently, not like intruders, but like old friends saying goodbye. I saw my children as babies again, felt their weight in my arms. I saw my siblings laughing before bitterness set in. I even saw him, but smaller somehow, stripped of power, just a man who no longer had control over my story. When the end came, it was quiet. No grand speech, no sudden revelation. Just a long breath and the feeling of finally setting something down. I didn't see what happened afterward, but I know it anyway. The envelope was delivered. The truth rippled outward, just as I had imagined. Some denied it immediately. Some called it lies, manipulation, a dying woman's attempt to rewrite history. But others, more than I expected, recognized the pieces that finally fit together. Memories they had ignored, moments they had brushed aside, the unease they had mistaken for loyalty. My name was spoken differently after that, not universally forgiven. Not universally understood, but no longer reduced to a single cruel sentence. She abandoned us. They said instead she carried something alone. The adult I protected stood taller in the aftermath. They spoke their truth without apology. They broke patterns I had once believed unbreakable. They lived the life I had hoped for them, one not ruled by silence, not shaped by fear. As for my other children, the truth reached them too, slowly, painfully. There was anger, yes. Grief. A mourning not just for me, but for the mother they thought they had lost. But understanding followed. And in time, compassion. They didn't get their childhood back, but they got the truth. And sometimes, that's the beginning of healing. If you are reading this, wondering whether silence is love, let me tell you what a lifetime of it taught me. Silence can save someone in the moment, but it always asks for payment later. The debt comes due in confusion, in self-blame, in unanswered questions that echo for decades. I let my family hate me because I believed the truth would break them. I was wrong. What breaks people is not the truth, it is being left alone with it. My life will never be a simple story, it shouldn't be. Real love rarely is. But if I'm remembered for anything, let it be this. Sometimes the villain in your story is just the one who carried the unbearable so others didn't have to. And sometimes, at the very end, the truth doesn't destroy the family after all. Sometimes it finally gives them back to each other. There is one small piece left, the kind that doesn't shout for attention, but lingers long after the rest of the story is told. After I was gone, my house was emptied slowly. Drawers opened, closets sorted. Objects passed from hand to hand, each carrying a quiet question. Who was she, really? The adult I had protected moved through those rooms carefully, as if listening for echoes. They found things no one else would have noticed. Old grocery lists tucked into books, pressed flowers between pages, envelopes addressed but never sent. Evidence of a life that kept going even when it was unloved. They told me later, though I was no longer there to hear it, that what struck them most was how ordinary everything was. No bitterness written on the walls, no shrine to suffering, just a woman who had cooked, cleaned, worried, hoped. A woman who had lived with a terrible truth and still managed to be gentle. At my small service, not everyone came. That was expected, but some who did surprised even themselves. One sibling stood longer than necessary beside my name. One child reached out and touched the casket, as if confirming something real at last. No speeches were made. None were needed. Silence for once was enough. In the months that followed, the story of me continued to shift. It softened at the edges. It became less about judgment and more about questions. What would I have done, people asked themselves. Would I have been braver or just louder? There were no easy answers, and that, strangely, felt right. The adult I had protected went on to do something I never managed to do while alive. They spoke. They spoke when something felt wrong. They spoke when silence tried to dress itself up as peace. They spoke for themselves, and sometimes for others who couldn't yet find the words. Every time they did, a small piece of my lifetime of quiet loosened its hold on the world. That is how I know my story didn't end with my last breath. It ended with truth finally moving freely, no longer locked inside one woman's chest, no longer disguised as abandonment or weakness. It ended with understanding, imperfect, but alive. I let my family hate me because I thought love meant shielding them from the worst thing imaginable. What I learned, too late and just in time, is that love also means trusting people with the truth when they are ready to carry it. If you remember anything from my life, remember this. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who walk away, so others can stay safe. And sometimes the bravest thing they ever do is finally tell their story. That was mine, and now, at last, it is complete.